My cousin tried to hit me after I refused to lend him my car. He said, "You're a terrible person." I reported him to the family. Now nobody trusts him with anything. Story 1. I've been sitting on this story for a few days, and I still can't fully believe it happened. I've dealt with entitled people before, but this is on another level. It's long and messy, but if you've ever had to set boundaries with a toxic family member, maybe you'll get where I'm coming from. I'm Zeke, 35, single, and living in Rochester, New York. I've worked hard to build a stable life. I've got a decent job managing properties, a modest apartment, and my pride and joy, a 2020 Toyota Camry. It's nothing fancy, but I bought it brand new, and I take care of it like it's a classic. It's reliable, clean, and most importantly, mine. I'm not someone who spends big on flashy things, but this car? It's my one splurge, and I protect it like it's made of gold. Then there's my cousin, Silas. He's 27 and, to put it bluntly, a walking tornado of bad decisions. He's been jobless for a while, hops between relationships like they're a game, and has a track record of irresponsibility that could fill a novel. Everyone in the family knows Silas as the guy who shows up late to every event, takes more than his share, and then disappears the second you ask him for anything. But because he's family, people let him get away with it. I've tried to keep my distance, but apparently, that wasn't enough. A week ago, Silas called me out of nowhere. This guy doesn't call unless he needs something, so I was already wary. I picked up, and the conversation went something like this. "Yo, Zeke. How's it going, man?" Hey, Silas. What's up?" I didn't bother with small talk because I knew he wasn't calling to chat. "Listen, I need a favor," he said, his tone way too casual. "Can I borrow your car for a couple of days?" Let me tell you, my stomach sank. I knew where this was heading, and I wasn't having it. Silas has wrecked not one but 2 cars in the last 3 years. One was his ex's car, which he somehow managed to crash into a tree while dodging a squirrel. The other was a rental he was driving uninsured when he rear-ended someone. Both times, it was never his fault, according to him. So, I said exactly what any sane person would: "Sorry, Silas, but no. I can't let you borrow my car." He went silent for a second, then said, "Wait, what? Why not?" I explained it as nicely as I could. "You're not on my insurance, and I can't afford to take the risk. I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen." That's when his tone flipped like a switch. "Are you serious right now? You're really gonna do me like that? We're family, Zeke. Family helps family." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but this isn't just about helping. If something happens, I'm the one stuck with the bill, and you've got a history, Silas. You've wrecked cars before." That hit a nerve. "Oh, come on," he snapped. "Those were accidents. It's not like I planned them. What's your problem? You think you're better than me just because you've got your precious little job and your shiny car?" I couldn't help but laugh at that last part. "Silas, it's a Camry. It's not exactly a Lamborghini." Apparently, that wasn't the response he was looking for because he completely lost it. He called me selfish, arrogant, a fake, and even threw in that I was a disappointment to the family. He kept going, ranting about how hard his life has been and how I don't know what it's like to struggle. Mind you, this is coming from the guy who's been living rent-free with his mom since his last breakup. I tried to end the conversation there. "Look, Silas, I'm sorry, but my answer's final. I can't help you. I hope you figure something else out." I hung up, thinking that was the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. About 3 hours later, there was a loud knock at my apartment door. Not a polite knock, either, more like someone trying to break the door down. I opened it, and there was Silas, looking like he'd just walked 5 miles in the cold. His face was red, and he was shaking, either from anger or from whatever drama he'd cooked up in his head on the way over. "You're unbelievable," he said, stepping right up to me like he owned the place. "I needed you, Zeke. I needed you, and you turned your back on me. You're nothing but a selfish, self-centered prick." "Get out, Silas," I said firmly. "I'm not doing this with you. You need to leave." Instead of leaving, he took a step closer and raised his hand, like he was going to hit me. I don't know if he was bluffing or if he'd actually snapped, but either way, I wasn't about to let him get physical. I stepped back and slammed the door in his face. "Get off my property before I call the cops," I yelled through the door. He stayed outside for another couple of minutes, yelling about how I was the worst cousin in the world, but eventually, he left. I locked every door and window that night, just in case. The next day, I thought it was over. Then the phone calls started. My Aunt Coraline, Silas's mom, called me first. "What did you do to Silas?" she demanded. Excuse me?" I said, completely caught off guard. "He came home so upset. He said you humiliated him and refused to help when he needed you. How could you treat your cousin like that?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Coraline, your son showed up at my apartment uninvited and tried to hit me because I wouldn't let him borrow my car. He's lucky I didn't call the police. She didn't believe me. Silas said you overreacted. He's going through a tough time, Zeke. The least you could do is show a little compassion. I was floored. Compassion? Coraline, he's wrecked 2 cars already, and he has no insurance. I'm not putting myself at risk for him. But she wasn't interested in hearing my side. You're tearing this family apart with your stubbornness, she said before hanging up. By the next day, word had spread through the entire family. My phone was blowing up with calls and texts from relatives, each one with their own opinion about what I should have done. Some said I should have just lent him the car to keep the peace. Others said I was too harsh. Even my mom, who usually stays neutral in these situations, said, maybe you could have handled it differently, Zeke. Now Silas is playing the victim, telling everyone I'm a heartless jerk who doesn't care about family. Coraline's backing him up, of course, and it's turning into a full-blown mess. Half the family's mad at me, the other half's mad at Silas, and I'm stuck in the middle wondering how the hell we got here. After a few days of family drama, I'd had enough. Silas was dragging my name through the mud, Aunt Coraline was stoking the flames, and my phone was constantly buzzing with relatives telling me how to fix things. It was clear this wasn't going to die down unless I did something drastic. I wasn't about to let Silas and his lies ruin my reputation, so I decided to fight back. But not in the way he or anyone else expected. First, I started collecting evidence. Silas might have been loud and obnoxious, but he wasn't smart. Over the years, he'd left a trail of bad decisions and burned bridges that I could practically map out. I went through old messages, pulled up screenshots, and even called a couple of mutual acquaintances who'd been screwed over by him in the past. It was like piecing together a puzzle, and let me tell you, Silas didn't come out looking good. I found text messages from years ago where he'd borrowed money from a cousin and never paid it back. Another cousin shared how Silas had borrowed his truck, only to return it with a busted side mirror and a flat tire, and no apology. Even his ex-girlfriend, the one whose car he'd wrecked, was willing to give me a statement about how he'd ghosted her after the accident, leaving her to deal with the insurance mess. To top it off, I found proof that Silas had lied to Coraline about a loan she gave him last year. He'd claimed he needed it to cover rent, but instead, he'd blown it on a weekend trip to Atlantic City. I put it all together in a neat little folder, screenshots, receipts, text messages, and even some photos of the damage he'd caused over the years. If Silas wanted to drag my name through the mud, I was going to make sure he went down with me. I called for a family meeting. Yes, an actual sit-down, face-to-face gathering at my mom's house. It was the only way to get everyone in one place and settle this mess once and for all. I told everyone it was important and that we needed to clear the air. To my surprise, most of them showed up, including Silas, Coraline, and even Grandma Mildred, who hadn't left her house in months. As soon as we sat down, Silas started running his mouth. I don't even know why we're here, he said. Zeke's just trying to make me look bad because he's a bitter, selfish jerk. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I stood up, pulled out my folder, and calmly addressed the room. Since Silas wants to make this a family issue, I think it's time we all had a clear picture of what's really been going on, I began. I've stayed quiet for years, but I'm not going to let him lie about me anymore. Then I laid everything out. I started with the recent car drama, explaining how he'd tried to borrow my car, threw a tantrum when I said no, and even tried to get physical. I showed them the text messages he sent after I refused, filled with insults and threats. Then I moved on to the bigger stuff, the cars he'd wrecked, the money he'd borrowed and never repaid, and the lies he'd told to cover his tracks. Silas's face turned redder with every word I said. He tried to interrupt, but I wasn't having it. Silas, you've been blaming everyone else for your problems for years. This stops now. I showed everyone the screenshots of him bragging to his friends about the Atlantic City trip he'd taken with Coraline's loan money. Coraline looked like she'd been slapped in the face. Is this true? She asked him, her voice shaking. Silas stammered, I needed a break. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure? I shot back. You don't have a job, Silas. What pressure? By the time I finished, the room was dead silent. Nobody was looking at Silas anymore, not even Coraline. Grandma Mildred, who rarely spoke up, finally broke the silence. Silas, she said, her voice stern, you're a grown man acting like a spoiled child. You've embarrassed this family for long enough. Uncle Gerard, who had always been one of Silas's defenders, looked at him with disgust. You owe everyone here an apology. And more than that, you owe them money. Silas tried to backpedal. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Zeke's just trying to make me look worse than I am. No, Silas, Coraline snapped, her face pale with anger, you did that all on your own. By the end of the meeting, Silas was effectively exiled. Coraline announced she wouldn't be giving him another dime until he got a job and paid back what he owed. Uncle Gerard said Silas wasn't welcome at any family gatherings until he made amends. Even Grandma Mildred told him to leave her out of his drama from now on. And me? I got my piece. Nobody blamed me anymore. In fact, a few relatives apologized for siding with Silas in the first place. Even my mom admitted I'd done the right thing by standing my ground. But here's the best part. A few days after the meeting, Silas tried to guilt-trip Coraline into letting him stay with her again. She refused, so he ended up crashing on a friend's couch. That friend, apparently, had no patience for Silas's nonsense either. After a week of freeloading, Silas got kicked out. Word got back to me that Silas had been forced to take a job at a fast food joint just to pay rent on a tiny studio apartment. For a guy who thought he was too good to work, that was sweet, sweet justice. And my car? Still safe, still mine, and still pristine. So yeah, Silas got what was coming to him. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything underhanded to make it happen. I just told the truth and let him dig his own grave. Story 2. My name is Sabine, and this is the story of how my dad tried to sell me to pay off his gambling debts. I wish I were kidding. To this day, I still can't believe any of it happened. I've gone over it 100 times in my head, and it still feels like I lived through someone else's nightmare. But it was real, and I lived it. I grew up in a small town in West Virginia called Oak Hollow. It's not the kind of place you'd hear about unless you were lost and needed directions. The factories shut down a long time ago, and what was left were dollar stores, payday loan places, and a bunch of sad, tired people just trying to get by. My dad, Elmer, wasn't much different. He worked odd jobs here and there but never seemed to stick to anything. The one thing he was consistent about was gambling, and let me tell you, he was bad at it. My mom died when I was 7, and after that, it was just me and Elmer. He wasn't a violent man, not really, but he was neglectful. After Mom passed, I basically had to raise myself. I taught myself how to cook, how to clean, and how to scrape by on as little as possible. I worked hard in school because I knew the only way out of Oak Hollow was through my grades. I didn't want to end up like everyone else in that town, stuck, hopeless, and bitter. By the time I was 16, I had a plan. I worked part-time at the local diner, saving every cent I could. My goal was to graduate high school, move to Pittsburgh, and stay with my best friend Irene's aunt while I went to college. It wasn't much, but it was the dream that kept me going. Meanwhile, my dad was spiraling. He'd lost most of what little money we had gambling, and when he ran out of cash, he started pawning things off. First, it was his tools. Then, it was Mom's jewelry. Then, it was furniture from the house. By the time this story takes place, the house was practically empty, the electricity got shut off every other month, and there were times when we had to get water from the neighbors just to flush the toilet. One night, I came home from a long shift at the diner to find my dad sitting in the living room. He had a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He looked up at me when I walked in and said, "Sabine, we need to talk." That was never a good sign. I sat down, exhausted and already dreading whatever mess he'd gotten himself into this time. "What is it, Dad?" He took a long drag of his cigarette, then looked me dead in the eye. "I owe some money," he said. "A lot of money." This wasn't news to me. My dad always owed money to someone. "What else is new?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What do you want me to do about it?" "It's serious this time, Sabine," he said, his voice cracking. "I owe money to people who don't mess around. If I don't pay them back, they're gonna come after me. And when they do, they're not just coming for me, they're coming for you too." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" He took another drag of his cigarette, then set it down on the edge of the ashtray. "They gave me an option," he said. "It's either you or the house." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "What do you mean, me or the house?" "I can't pay them back, Sabine. They said if I give them you, they'll call it even. They'll take care of you. Set you up with a new life. You'll be better off." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're trying to sell me?" "Don't say it like that," he snapped. "It's not like I want to do this. But what choice do I have? If I don't, we'll lose the house. We'll lose everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father was trying to sell me off like I was some piece of furniture. Like I wasn't even a person. "Are you out of your damn mind?" I said, standing up so fast I almost knocked the chair over. "You think you can just trade me away like some kind of deal?" "It's not like that," he said, his voice rising. "You don't understand. These people are serious. If I don't give them something, they're going to kill me. You think I want to do this? You think I want to lose the house?" I didn't even know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how I'd gotten to this point. How had my life come to this? I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I couldn't move. "I'm not going anywhere," I said finally, my voice shaking. "I don't care what kind of mess you've gotten yourself into. I'm not your bargaining chip." He just shook his head and took another swig from the bottle. "You'll thank me someday," he muttered. "You'll see. It's for the best." That night, I locked myself in my room and stayed up all night trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't run, I had no money and nowhere to go. If I called the cops, would they even believe me? My dad was a screw-up, sure, but this was a whole new level of evil. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal. But then, as I sat there in the dark, an idea started to form. If my dad wanted to sell me, fine. I'd let him think he could. But I'd be the one pulling the strings. The next morning, I told him I'd do it. I said I'd go along with his plan as long as I got to choose who he sold me to. He looked at me like I'd just made his dreams come true. I knew you'd understand, he said, patting me on the shoulder like he wasn't trying to ruin my life. He gave me the name and number of the guy he owed money to, a sleazy piece of work named Dominic. Apparently, Dominic was the middleman for these so-called buyers. I called Dominic that afternoon and told him I was willing to make a deal, but only if I got to meet the buyers first. Dominic laughed but agreed, probably thinking I was already too broken to cause trouble. Meanwhile, I started working on my real plan. I downloaded fake adoption papers from the internet and filled them out, making it look like I was being adopted by a wealthy family in Pennsylvania. Then, I went to the local police station and told them everything. At first, they didn't believe me. I mean, who would? But once I showed them the fake adoption papers and explained what my dad was planning, they started to take me seriously. They agreed to set up a sting operation, but it wasn't going to be easy. Dominic and his buyers weren't amateurs, and they had a reputation for slipping through the cracks. If this was going to work, I had to play my part perfectly. I didn't have time to think about what would happen if I failed. The next few days were the longest of my life. I kept my act together, playing the obedient daughter willing to go along with my dad's sick plan. I worked out every detail with the cops, making sure they knew exactly how things would go down. They wired me with a hidden mic and had undercover officers posing as hotel staff at the meeting place. I told myself over and over that I could do this, that I had to do this. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at a rundown motel on the edge of town. My dad drove me there, whistling like he'd just won the lottery. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping my fake adoption papers so hard my knuckles turned white. My stomach was in knots, but I couldn't let it show. "You're doing the right thing," my dad said as he pulled into the motel parking lot. "These people are going to take care of you, Sabine. Better than I ever could." I didn't say anything. If I opened my mouth, I might have screamed. We walked into the motel room, where Dominic and two men in suits were waiting. Dominic looked me up and down like I was a piece of meat. "She'll do," he said, grinning. "She's got that innocent look they like." The bile rose in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Can I see the papers?" I asked, holding up the fake adoption documents. "I just want to make sure everything's official." One of the suit guys laughed. "You think this is some kind of legal process, kid? You don't need to worry about papers." Dominic handed a folder to my dad. "Here's the deal. Once you sign this, the debt's wiped clean, and she's their problem." My dad didn't hesitate. He grabbed the pen and started signing, smiling like he'd just hit the jackpot. That's when the door burst open. The cops stormed in, shouting commands. Dominic and the buyers froze, caught completely off guard. My dad tried to run, but one of the officers tackled him to the ground. The hidden mic I was wearing had recorded everything, every disgusting word, every agreement, every signature. They had it all. I stood there, shaking, as the officers handcuffed Dominic and the buyers. My dad was yelling, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he didn't know what he was doing. But the cops weren't listening. They dragged him out of the room while he kept screaming, "Sabine! You did this to me." Damn right I did. The aftermath was messy, but it worked out in the end. Dominic and the buyers were part of a bigger human trafficking ring that had been under investigation for years. My dad's stupidity gave the cops the evidence they needed to shut it down. Dominic got 50 years in prison, and the buyers weren't far behind. As for my dad, he tried to play dumb, claiming he didn't know what Dominic was really doing. But the recordings proved he knew exactly what he was signing me up for. He was charged with human trafficking, conspiracy, and child endangerment. He got 30 years. The last time I saw him was in court. He didn't look at me once, but I didn't care. I stared him down as the judge handed down the sentence. For the first time in my life, I felt free. With my dad gone, I moved to Pittsburgh, just like I'd planned. Irene's aunt took me in, and I finally got to start over. I finished high school, got into college, and began building the life I'd always dreamed of. It wasn't easy, but I did it. Sometimes I think about my dad, sitting in a cell somewhere, knowing he's paying for what he tried to do to me. I don't feel sorry for him. He made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences. People like to say revenge doesn't solve anything. Maybe that's true for some, but for me? It was justice. And I'll never regret taking control of my life, even if it meant putting my own father behind bars. He wanted to sell me like I was nothing. Now he's the one who lost everything.